And without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce you to our culture panel here at the Culture Forum, led by Stan Siewicz, who we heard give the most engaging conversation around compensation that we've ever heard. So please welcome to the stage the Culture panel.
I'm going to take the steps.
Bring water for Stan.
More water.
Oh, there is some there. Good.
Right.
Oh, the questions are there.
So before I introduce our panelists, and some of them you already know, I would like to invite all of you to, as you hear the questions, think about what you would say if you were seated up here trying to respond to it. Because these are universal questions related to our exploration today. We're also going to be taking questions from you all. We'll start out with a few, but if you start to think of something you want to ask, please don't hesitate to raise your hand and ask for a microphone. Please enjoy this brief musical interlude. So to my right, we have Dr. Shamu Sundaramurthy, who is the Interim Associate Dean for Research and Strategic Initiatives at the Fowler College of Business here at San Diego State, and the former chair of the Management Department of the Fowler College. Next is Gary Ridge, Chairman Emeritus of WD-40 Company, and CEO of that company for 25 years, 35 years total service. I think he was probably born with a can in his hand. Dr. Beth Chung is the current department chair of the Management Department at the Fowler College of Business. And to her right is Jeffrey Crabb, CEO of Diamond Sea Trailers. So thank you all for being here. You can applaud. So Jeffrey, I'd like to start with you if you don't mind.
Yes, sir.
And we can hear from other panelists as we go along. We've heard a lot about the principles of creating a culture of high engagement, high performance, and a high quality of life. What are the principles you've found that you think are the most important in your own journey as a leader?
In my own journey as a leader, definitely much of what we talked about yesterday in hiring right, defining values first, hiring right to the best of your ability. But then I would add to that something that we've learned lots of lessons about along the way is how we hold our teams, develop our teams in those respective values, how we hold them accountable to it, develop them in those values, has been definitely one of the most impactful principles that we've learned in our experience the last few years. Gotcha.
Anyone else like to comment on that?
Well, yeah, I will, Stan. I was fortunate enough in my first class in the MSEL program to go through a program where you had to understand who you were. And to lead, you first have to understand yourself. And the big learning moment from that was you cannot make anybody do anything. You cannot really change anybody. And if you want to bring the best out of others that you lead, you have to make the sacrifice of change. And I'll give you an example of that. I did the DISC profile, and I was a Turbo D. And a Turbo D is be brief, be bright, and be gone. And I had one of my direct reports who was a Turbo I. And my definition of a Turbo I is they're always late for meetings because they're building relationships along the way. So you can imagine when the Turbo D, who wants to be brief, be bright, be gone, and the Turbo I meet together, there could be some conflict. Or at least we wouldn't get anything done. And I learned from that class that it was me that needed to change. So I did something very simple. Every time I went to meet with that person in their office, who was an extremely bright individual, I'd take a cup of coffee. And I would sit there and I would tell my D self, nothing matters in this meeting until you drink that coffee, which let the Turbo I be their I self and build that foundation of relationship that they needed to be comfortable. So my biggest learning moment is to be a leader, don't think you're going to change anybody else. To bring the best out in others, you have to change yourself to maximize the leader.
So on this topic, is there a difference simply because of the nature of the organization? Like in the university setting, it's a government-funded as well as the student-funded entity that has a lot of regulations and a lot of history on how you do things that is quite different than the for-profit or even the non-profit world. Beth, how would you describe the principles that you think might apply for that culture building in that setting?
Okay. First, I'm going to put my little professor hat on for just a moment because that's my primary job. Culture is one of the most important things in terms of what an organization can do. It is what distinguishes you from other cultures and other organizations. And at the root of that is the basic assumptions that lead to the values of the organization. So whatever organization you're leading, I think those basic assumptions are what has to be foundational and that everybody understands. So in a particular organization such as an educational institution, you can feel the difference between different schools, can you not? You can usually tell, well, this school's about this and this school's about this. And one of the things that our school has been really foundational on in recent years is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I don't know if you've noticed that about San Diego State or not, but what we've done is we've made it part of the fabric of who we are in our strategic planning, in the way the university president talks about different events that happen. So I think that for us, just like companies, I think it's really important to have the guiding principles that your values are solid, that everybody understands those values, and that we live by those values.
Shamu?
So I'm going to take the professor hat off here and reflect on my journey as I said, I was former chair, as a chair, so more of living the experience of some of what I actually teach in class. So when I heard Ron present those frameworks that I present and seeing that the challenges of living that are that we don't have compensation. We don't have the luxury of making these changes, right? We're set range, we come in, this is all you have. And there's really, that lever is not there. So how do we build cultures? And one of the things that I discovered that was really interesting for me, that I teach, that I was able to live, is the sense of purpose being so huge in helping us, motivate us as a group. I mean, again, you would think you're an educational institution. You change people's lives through student teaching, right? But we get into our daily lives, you say, oh, I teach an OB class, I teach a strategy class. We can get into the minutiae, but who are we as a collective? So we as a department engaged in a journey of saying, who are we? What is our purpose? And our purpose was, we said, amplifying the human side of business as a management department. We do different things, but that's what we center our purpose on. And so this goes back to the other idea that when an organization defines the purpose broadly in terms of societal impact, the individuals, we as individuals, we teach our classes, we do our research that ties into that purpose. So that's a lever for us to motivate and engage and build cultures. So that would be one, and there are other two pieces, but I'll leave it at that and come back to the other two
Okay.
that I think are important.
Well, why don't we hear about it now?
Okay. The other two, I think, as I was reflecting, and I was here yesterday and today, which was lovely to be in these learner seats that we all need, and it's just been phenomenal, is I was reflecting on it last night and thinking, really there are 3 Ps, if you will, that really are important for culture. That's the lesson I'm taking away from what everyone's provided in terms of input, which is The first one is purpose, right? And I talked about this collective purpose. And there's data that shows, and we all teach it, we present it in our classes. But really, that purpose, we derive so much of purpose from our work. And that's a key piece. The second P, if you will, is the person. And that's the leadership that we heard from Gary, from Jim, right? That you have to really hold yourself to a much higher standard. And Stan mentioned this to me way back. As someone in these roles, I discovered you've got to hold yourself to a higher standard. You have to be aware. What we set, it's very important, right? I mean, that's the second piece, the person and the leadership, if you will. And the third P for me was processes. And I know that's a bad word sometimes. We say, oh my God, policy. They build trust. And I was just looking at this. I heard, in so many cases, I heard Stan talk about trust in a system. Gary mentioned psychological safety. Processes do that for us. When we have guidelines, and we discovered it in our journey as a department, when there was a tough moment at a decision, and this was a hiring decision, we realized that, we need processes as a gap, right? And so it serves a purpose, and the psychological safety is built that way. Conflict resolution, we heard from Ashley. That's, again, building trust in the system, having a process for dealing with it, starting from the positive, right, is key. Jim, of course, talked about the behavior of the leader. That's the person piece. Davin mentioned purpose, so that's the P. And Ron had talked about awareness, right? Having processes to raise awareness that we are aware in terms of the diversity, equity, and inclusion. So those are the three Ps, I think, that we put together. And in our context, those three have really worked. And I think it'll work for others as well, I think. And we're different. We don't have the compensation lever, but we have these other levers.
Right. Well, you mentioned something that makes me think of a question I'd like to ask you all that's not on the list. Being a paragon of virtue all the time, to create the kind of culture that we're all talking about, you're on stage, as Gary has said, we all know it, we're being viewed by everyone, and people are deciding whether they should feel good or bad, depending on how we behave as leaders. And it can be exhausting. That constant awareness, that constant self-governance, that constant deciding how to change yourself, as Gary said, instead of trying to change others. Is there anything that you've found as leaders that helps energize you to be able to get up the next day and be on stage, engaged, self-aware through that demanding type of a role, where in order to behave well yourself, in order to have your culture behave as you hope? Jeffrey, why don't we start with you?
I would suggest that relentless focus on purpose, as you just talked about. I believe that that's the only thing that can drive me through the challenging conversations, the challenging days, is knowing that the work we're doing is making a difference. We have the opportunity through the lives that we're stewarding to impact not just the people working directly for me, but their families, their communities, to even change generations. We're a manufacturer, and we employ many people that no one in their family's gone to college. They have no higher education in their family. They're first-time home buyers. They're looking to build their lives. And so trying to keep that at the forefront of the day, getting that mindset right before I go into the day and whatever challenges lie ahead, definitely is what drives me through the challenges of building a great culture, because it's not easy, as we've heard from our friend Gary here.
Right. I think we'd all agree it's simple but not easy to do, right?
Yeah.
So have you had those moments where I'm just exhausted, I can't do this today? What do you do about that? Gary?
You remind yourself, Stan, we are just these simple human beings bumbling our way down this pathway of life. And we run into stuff. And we're not perfect. And no leader is perfect. And as we walk down this pathway, in the bushes are these thieves that run out and grab us. Mm-hmm. The thieves of ego, the thieves of, greed, the thieves of whatever they are. And they take us in the bushes. And for a minute, we think this is a nice place to be. But it really isn't. So we have to understand that we're not perfect. Show vulnerability. Show that, you are just like anyone else. But also remind yourself every day is, who is the person I want to be right now? And then what do I need to do to be that person? And you would think a guy that's nearly 67 years old and that has led a public company for 25 years would be okay at that. I'm hopeless. I actually have on my desk over there my notebook. And on the front of my notebook, it has a stick-on thing that I look at I don't know how many times, and I have it on the phone, that says, am I being the person I want to be right now, and who is that person? And I have a list of who I want to be. Am I a listener? Am I curious? Do I throw sunshine, not a shadow? There's a whole list of things that I have to keep reminding myself of because I'm consciously incompetent. I couldn't do it. So I think we have to understand that vulnerability is okay. We need everybody else. And for others to want to help us, there's a reason they should like us, but there's also a reason we need to care about them. Asking that simple question occasionally, are you okay? What's on your mind? What's getting in your way? How may I serve you? How can I help?
You asked, how do you get back? Was a question, right, in terms of
How do you get back on stage when it's so hard and exhausting?
Yeah, so I think reaching for human connection. There are always people you can reach out and to always have that. You don't have to do it alone. You can be, that tank is down, you reach out and refill it. And that human connection, rely on people and say, that's the vulnerability. To say, my tank needs to be filled as well. And you can fill it. Give them the power to fill you, right? And as when Gary said, consciously incompetent is the word. It's the reverse. And I think it might be, sometimes the journey is different. It's to consciously also remind yourself, you're competent. May not be competent. It's okay if you're not competent, you can reach out. But you have also competence to get through this. And I think that's a reminder, sometimes from the journeys people start, I think. And if you are from certain groups, I think that reminder is useful. I think so. That's to your point. Get that reminder to yourself, reach out, and let people pull you up too, just as you pull people up. It goes both ways.
I wrote an article once that said CEOs need love too.
Oh, and you didn't share that with me.
And we do.
For me, there's purpose. We serve students. And students are the greatest inspiration for me. I've had students come back 20 years later and say, you changed my life, you made a difference. I had one just in the faculty staff club before that was here 15 years ago that ran up to me. And I teach 250 students, so I'm not going to remember everyone. And he ran up to me and he said, Professor Chung, I took you 15 years ago, and now I'm applying for the professor job in accounting. And I still remember you in your class. And those things fill me. And then on a daily level, I meditate. Meditation is very important to me, and that helps ground me and always reminds me of my purpose and why I'm here and how I can help. And then I do a series of grateful prayers. And it's not because I'm religious at all, but I'm grateful for all the things that I'm grateful for today, right in this moment. And it could be that I have a wonderful job with great colleagues, and I have my health, and my son is doing fine, and I have a house to live in, and I have a car to drive, and I have food for sustenance, and then everything is somehow okay after that. And so that's kind of the daily thing for me, in addition to the global purpose for being.
Well, it's so interesting that you all have methodologies of doing it. And that wasn't on the list of questions, but you all had an answer to it. I felt certain that was the case. Otherwise, you couldn't keep doing this very intense role. Well, next question would be, what are the major hurdles that you've experienced on the path towards achieving the kind of culture you'd like to help create as a leader? Things that have gotten in the way. Gary, you want to start this one?
Time. I've often said that you can't sprinkle fairy dust on an organization and grow culture. And I think time is the consistency of time and patience in doing it is so. And unfortunately, a lot of leaders don't have that time. I'm grateful I was not fired 25 years ago because I did have 25 years to play this out. And I often said I've done my 25-year apprenticeship now and I still haven't worked it out. But, time is something. And then consistency of message, of behaviors, zero tolerance, which was something I should have been better at. I let things go on that I should, if I look back now, I can see things that I should have acted on, and that's why I love what I learned from my friend Ron in that, I sometimes protected my own comfort zone at the expense of not only other people's development, but at the expense of the company's growth, because I knew I should have done it, and I was protecting my own comfort zone. So, no good deed that goes unpunished. I've said that many times, but the hard things are the brave things. So I use the word bravery a lot now when I talk about leadership. It's not for the weak at heart at all. It's hard. It's really hard. You have to be brave. But as we've said, the rewards are enormous because you get the chance to hold someone's arm as they're walking down that pathway and to watch them develop and go forward and deliver and do great things in life. And you've just had that little bit of time to touch them along the way is very, very rewarding.
Well, Beth, in the university setting again, which is, I think, not unlike a union setting, right? Or any government agency, and boy, could we use better culture in our government agencies these days. But Beth, what are the hurdles that you've seen in that kind of a setting?
Well, things don't move fast in our institution or any public institution. So there's layers and layers and layers of paperwork and getting approvals and things like that. So I think it's building those relationships and collaborating with people so that you know where to go to get things done and how to get things done and what are the processes to get things done. Helping your faculty understand that those are the hurdles, but that we can manage those hurdles, and once we know how to manage those hurdles, that we can get through it easier and help each other get through those. As Shamu has mentioned, our salaries here are not anything to brag about. So when we hire a new person, it's a real challenge because our department has some of the best faculty in terms of publications and our teaching, and yet, and people are attracted to us. They want to come to us, but our pay just isn't at the same level as those other institutions. And so it's attracting them in other ways. And culture is one of the ways we attract them. And almost every applicant that's come to us has said, what's visibly evident about your group is that you have an amazing culture. And this is where I want to be because of that. Right now, we're trying to attract someone who's probably at the top of their game. And we really had to use that particular piece about our department that's really helpful in attracting people to come. So there's definitely a lot of challenges and hurdles, but culture is one thing that we've spent a lot of time building, and I think that's definitely in our favor. Jeffrey,
what about the hurdles you faced in a for-profit, multi-site
We may need the rest of the day to unpack that. A few that come to mind. I think first and foremost for us is growth. We are a high growth organization. Have grown 10 times in 10 years. And so building extraordinary culture in the process of growth, I mean, we often say it's like changing the tire on a moving car. Many things about growth are contradictory to building extraordinary culture. So we've had to learn many lessons and become much, much more intentional in systematizing it to scale. Still learning many lessons about that. But then hand in hand with that is leadership development. I believe extraordinary culture rises and falls on leadership on every level, starting with the CEO or the leader of the organization to each department manager and leader. And if we're not able to bring them along with us, I can have amazing ideas about culture and initiatives and strategy, and even invest resources in developing highly engaged culture, but it doesn't matter if their direct leader experience doesn't reflect that, is not consistent with that. And that's been definitely a hurdle for us to overcome as we've grown in how do we bring up leaders, develop leaders at a fast enough pace for the leadership capacity to be ahead of the business growth. If the leaders aren't able to lead in an extraordinary way, in a healthy, high-performing way, invest and coach their team members effectively, then our efforts to build extraordinary culture are almost hopeless.
Right.
And then last that I would just mention right quick in that is it's, I think, counterculture still. It's normal for everyone in this room, for most of us, it's normal for us to talk about culture or we wouldn't be here. And for many organizations, but just yesterday we had this aha moment and realization in so many of the team members we work with, these ideas of what are your personal values, what's your personal purpose? It's foreign territory. They don't speak the language, they don't understand it, and then so to try to assimilate them into a culture, they're not sure who they are to begin with. Mm-hmm. So we have so much kind of figuring out to do and reprogramming, and we can have an extraordinarily well-led department or group or function within our company. A candidate, maybe a prospect, is attracted to it because of that, the culture they see in it, but they've never experienced it before. They've never lived in it before. And I think they oftentimes, we're attempting to reprogram, especially, and probably every industry in the room has their own story, but I'm going to say especially in our world of manufacturing, where many of them, again, don't have higher education, haven't been exposed to these ideas of personal values, mission, vision, personal purpose, why are you here? We've got a lot of work to do. It's definitely a barrier for us in building great culture that we have to embrace and really dig into the education of that, the development of that, and help many of our team members to discover who they are and what their own values are. And hopefully we do a better and better job of doing that sooner than later as time goes on. Counterculture.
I'd like to pause here and see if there's a question from the audience before I go on to another one. Okay. So you just said something, Jeffrey, that makes me think. This room is filled with people who aren't here to learn why should I. They're here to learn more about how can I and how do we. Is there anything that you think we as organizations that subscribe to these concepts need to do or have a responsibility to do to affect the, let's call it 70 to 80% of other organizations who are not on this kind of a journey, either through our educational system or through our influence in the community? Beth, what do you think?
Well, for me personally, I teach culture because it's part of my curriculum in organizational behavior and in leadership. And I hope that every one of my students somehow learn something that they're going to then take into their professional lives, and that then they can spread the word with others. That's how I feel like I'm trying to affect the world. Also, I try to affect the world with the culture principles through consulting, through working with governments and things like that. I try to do it through the university when I've been at the university leadership level. So it really has to come from all of us in as many facets as possible. And of course, role modeling is a big piece of that, right? So if you're going to espouse a certain type of being in a certain type of culture, you have to role model that every day in how you hold yourself, in how you run your department and your organizations.
And Shamu, I know in your strategy course you teach culture, correct?
Yeah, I mean, yes. I mean, and I think you hear the famous quote that says, culture eats strategy. I guess Drucker, they claim Drucker said that. The way I kind of emphasize culture is it is an important part and key part of executing, right? You need to still have the strategy. It goes back to this framework. You need to know where you're positioning yourself. I mean, that's an important part, competitive advantage for teaching strategy. But we talk about a unique position in the marketplace, the value you're giving. But the key part is how are you going to deliver that value? If it's extraordinary customer experience, how are you going to deliver that value? And that how piece really comes from the people and the culture. And that's why culture is important. And we all, in our classes, one of the things from strategy, you want to do something that is hard to copy, right? You want to create a position in the marketplace, something that is hard to imitate. And what's hard to imitate? Building these relationships and the culture within an organization. That's why data repeatedly shows that good cultures, positive cultures, are important for success, organizational success, because it takes longer to copy. And it is to deliver the value, the way it has to be connected to the strategy, but there are certain basic components to that strategy, the culture that's important. So in terms of respect, how you treat people, all those are given. Those need to be part of it. Beyond that, are there certain elements, such as, are we going to really reward or focus on creativity more so? How do we build that creative culture within our organization? Or it might be efficiency. And efficiency is not a bad word. It's important, right? And how do you do it? How creatively can you do it? So that's how I kind of have worked. We think of it in the context of strategy, that I, again, the professor had of kind of engaging in strategic thinking.
Right. Well, Gary, as you've met with other companies and throughout your career, you've had lots of partners, lots of service providers, competitors. Do you see that there's a way to affect the broader community of for-profit businesses towards this type of a journey? Or is it they'll figure it out on their own or not?
Stan, if we had the answer, is that working?
No.
Hello? Oh, yeah. If we had the answer to that question, there'd be 300 people in this room. Because that was one of the objectives we had, is we believe that, there is a way to have people understand the power of the will of the people. And I'm not sure whether it was last year or the year before, in our annual report at WD-40, we focused it on our other secret formula. The WD-40 itself is a secret formula. It's locked in a vault and we never patented, so we've never had to disclose it and never will. Well, I guess there's no such thing as always or never. But the other part of it is the will of the people. I can write a nice strategic plan, take it over to Shamu and say, can you mark this up and give me a mark out of this? She said, yeah, good strategic plan. 60 out of 100. Most of them are 50-50. Good, you get 60. But if only 10% of our people go to work every day and are enthusiastic about executing that plan because they have only a 10% will, 10 times 60 is 600. But if 80% of our people go to work every day with a high will of the people, 80 times 60 is 4,800. There's your outcome. That's the simple conversations I've had with many CEOs, is why do you think you're going to maximize the return of your business, even if you have the best strategic plan in the world, if only a small percentage of your people have a high will of executing that because of whatever reasons, fill in the blank. And some of them still don't get, many still don't get it. For what reason? Is it short-term thinking? Is it the greed of Wall Street that says, I'm not going to give you time to execute that? What's getting in the way? Or is it one area that I think I've noticed is, well, that's all the soft stuff. You know, it's pizzas and popcorn and ping pong parties and bean bags and all that. It's not. That's dressing, that's jewelry. It's hard. And I don't think that they understand that, that it's not just, if you will, jewelry. It's reality that you have to execute across. And it's hard. It's really hard.
It's hard. People who haven't yet awakened to the quality of life that can be achieved with these principles as well as a better outcome. That's what confuses me. Quality of life, better outcomes. Why would you not want to go down this road? But I read an article in The Economist about Stanford's business school. They have an elective course there that teaches, this is in the professor's own words, teaches you how not to have to leave a job other than for your own accord. In other words, how not to get fired. And one of the principles that they teach in the course is, don't train a competent successor. Let that sink in for a minute. Don't train a competent successor so that even if they don't like you, they can't afford to get rid of you. This is in Stanford Business College, one of the preeminent, the university graduate school that gave Rishi Sunak his degree, who's now a Prime Minister of the UK. So something's going on in some academic settings, not necessarily in this one.
Not here.
Not here.
Because, and I'm going to step in. In fact, when I, and this is, if I may, and to Gary's point, started as chair and a CEO was in a residence, and I've had coffee with him, and I've shared this with him. He asked a challenge. He said, I understand what a marketing department does. I understand what a finance department does, and of course accounting. What does a management department teach? You know, and of course I did have a response, but I came back, and you probably know, we had this discussion. I came back and I said, we are the core, and we're being asked about this, and we need to have a sense. And that's when our purpose was to say, the human side matters. It's execution, and it's hard done, and I'm not cursing here, hard. It is hard, the people side of things. Mm-hmm. The hardest, if not, if I would say. And so, to your point.
It is the hardest because we're dealing with the most complex thing in the world, us.
Yeah, that's right.
Human beings.
That's right.
Right. We're the most complex thing that's ever been on the planet.
Yeah. That's and right. Yet to be duplicated.
Yet to be, well, we're working on that. So my last question, I think, for the panel, and please sing out if you guys have a question, is what guidance would you give the leaders present here today to help them on the journey, which they're already on, but to make their path easier or to make their chances of success greater in creating and sustaining that kind of culture that we've all been talking about for all the reasons we've been talking about? What guidance would you leave them with?
It's not about you. It's not about you.
It's not about you.
It's about the people you have the privilege to serve, the people you have the privilege to lead. It's not about you.
Mm-hmm. Jeffrey?
I would suggest that the adage, give an inch, take a mile, is applicable. Gary referenced earlier, and if he was to look back, there were things that he wished he had been more assertive on accountability with behaviors, I would assume. Mm-hmm. That's definitely much of my story in the last several years, and our story. guidance in building successful culture. We've talked a lot about establishing the values, get the values clear, but then I think we have to be really intentional in kind of applying all of our senses to the adherence to those values. So being very careful to pick up on when a value or a behavior is happening that may be an infraction on those values. Give an inch, take a mile. It can snowball and be toxic and really detrimental to the culture so quickly. And that's coming from the school of hard knocks and having lived through that, living through that currently. But just being very careful, especially CEOs and senior leaders, so often are the last to hear, the last to get the truth. So be careful to build systems, to find truth tellers, to have processes around you that ensure that you are aware of the behaviors and don't give an inch. Don't give an inch. Because it's hard work, and give an inch, take a mile, and it's difficult a much longer road, harder path to recover from, versus just being very quick to have the conflict conversation, the hard conversation to address the issue. And that may seem so obvious, but again, I'm just sharing that from our experience of trying to build an extraordinary culture and scale it. We have to be especially tuned into those behaviors that may be a threat to our values and handle those things accordingly.
And can I just add one thing to that, because you triggered a thought? Be aware of your behavior.
Absolutely. First and foremost, exactly.
Because leadership, culture is a shadow of the leader. Mm-hmm. And it was a bit like the story that Jim told on yesterday about the leader who went around picking up trash in a manufacturing plant that was setting the example. Mm-hmm. So be very aware of your own behavior, and that's hard to do.
Right. I mentioned truth tellers, not just about what's going on in the organization, but yes, exactly, with my own behavior. I've had to learn to develop relationships with a few folks that I know I can depend on to call me out, to let me know if I have been one of the ones infringing on that value or that behavior, and then listen well. And
get a coach.
Yeah, exactly. Work to improve. Yeah.
Beth, what would you offer?
They're trying to steal my thunder here. But I think for sure all the things that we've been talking about at this conference is your own values. Know your own values and be clear on them, as well as the collective values of your group or your organization, and then have those values guide you through the hard decisions. And stick to those values. Don't waver on those values, like the, give an inch type of thing. If you start to waver, that's where people are going to get confused. That's where people aren't clear. I'm going to give you an example of what's happening with DEI right now. As we all know what happened with George Floyd, all the companies decided to do, let's do DEI. We're going to have ads about DEI. We're going to have this person represent us. We're going to have clothing like this. But it wasn't something that was genuine and heartfelt and part of their core values. And for those companies, it failed and it backfired on them because they weren't really embracing and really feeling those values. They weren't part of their core values. They were just trying to jump on the train. And so you don't want to do that as leaders of your companies, right? And now they're firing all the DEI people because they're cutting costs. And DEI, people kind of forgot about it now, so we're going to let it go. And so I think it's really important to have a solid core values for yourself, for your collective group, and then all moving towards things and making decisions from that core set of values. And Gary, of course, for him, his values that he helped establish at WD-40, it lives today, right? His culture lives today. Despite the fact that he's not there, his culture and his value sets will always be there. And that's why culture is so important, because it's enduring after the people are gone. The culture stays.
Shamu?
I'm going to come back to the 3 Ps again. it's all about the leader, and it's all about the leader in some ways, and it's not about the leader, as Gary said. So the person in any role, leadership role matters, and so setting the principles, following those principles, role modeling, picking up the pin, when it needed, working unrelentlessly or relentlessly on the organization's purpose, so that each of us, the I and the we can make that connection. And that remembering what that we and I and how that fit, working on that, as well as nip it in the bud, make sure that those processes are there, because that is just as important. It's very important. So all three are important to remember that that's a system, and you can start small, and it's okay.
Well, thank you all for your wisdom, your advice, and guidance. And I'll just close with the analogy that Gary gave us of the Petri dish, that it's about what you put in it to feed it, and whether or not you take out the parts that shouldn't be there. And it's a daily thing.
May I have permission to say something?
You can certainly have permission.
I want to thank, it's been an honor being on this panel, and I want to thank you. I publicly want to thank this journey started as part of our culture in the management department, the conversations with Stan, and I'm so thankful and grateful to Stan and to Gary and to Davin and to Lisa as well for making this happen. Thank you for giving me.
Absolutely.
All right.